Hello there, welcome to the Commerce Collaborative Project by Dispersed Global and Ukrainian Media. I'm Elena Solodovnikova, and it's a great pleasure to me to be joined by Natalka Gumenyuk, journalist, documentary filmmaker, and a co-founder of the Laboratory for Public Interest Journalism. Hello, Natalka.
Hi, hello.
You travel a lot and communicate with the diplomats and intellectuals from all over the world. How has their attitude towards the Ukraine changed over the past 10 years? For example, McFaul or Fukuyama, then and now, there are two other people in terms of their perception of Ukraine.
So you're interesting, you said the 10 years, because indeed this is the change which needed like almost a decade. So, like the interest to Ukraine obviously, appeared, I'm speaking about the latest interest, mainly during the Euromaidan revolution, and then later after the Russian occupation of Crimea and the war in the Donbass. Some of the people you mentioned, like Mike McFaul or Francis Fukuyama, but I'll list quite a number of them. Would it be Timothy Snyder or Anne Applebaum, or, like this kind of group of people who now are considered like by default the huge supporters of Ukraine. They started to follow, they were interested in, they wanted to understand, and they already then understood that something is more serious. I would keep, Francis Fukuyama a bit differently because, he's coming from a bit different school of thoughts, not focus on the region, on Eastern Europe, because he's kind of like his interests are way broader. But for instance, Snyder, Applebaum, McFaul, they were easy into Russia or into Eastern Europe. And, I think that was a critical thing to gain the trust. To gain the trust to the Ukrainian civil society, to the Ukrainian journalists, to, some of the Ukrainians who are currently in the authorities. So, like if you really like following, they were coming here one by one, give an interview. I remember, I think I've been, like probably the first interviews of Tim Snyder, for the Ukrainian media when we were taking, and the lectures when most of the people wouldn't really know who he is. And honestly, his books were not really selling that well. However, they were there and they were the same masterpieces as they are. So by 2022, obviously all those people became kind of very much knowledgeable. But beyond that, they've been here multiple times. They know a lot of Ukrainians. And they also observed something which is often missed in the international coverage. I'm speaking about the reforms which took place after 2014, because I insist that turning point for Ukrainian, democracy, at least in the current moment, there was the Euromaidan revolution, the revolution of the dignity. It was the moment when Ukraine understood that is existential, that if you won't change the country, like it happened during the Orange Revolution, if you really won't do this, real change, not just like replacing the corrupt government with opposition, but however, with maybe not that corrupt, but with kind of like the same thinking of the way how to run the country, but genuine reforms. Would it be energy? Because I want to give an example, what is Naftogaz? It's a totally different company that was in there in 2012. The reform of the police, the reforms of the public broadcaster, the media, but also civil service reform. So it's something happened that by 2022, Ukraine actually was the democracy, was pretty kind of obvious, clear democracy. There were like some flaws in it. It was far from perfect, but to be honest, in terms of being pluralistic, in terms of being, a very open society, it was more than some of the Eastern European countries. So obviously, when the full-scale invasion started, it was already like the group of the friends who really cared deeply, mainly thanks to numerous interactions with various Ukrainians from the all, political groups, from the all kinds of the representatives of the society, and that's probably this trust is still there, and that's the understanding. But honestly, something else. I was recently in Georgia, and I was really also talking to, why quite a few, let's say Westerners, let's use this term. I don't really like it, but let's say like that. I know they are panicking a bit about what's going on of the, the fact how the not even the government, but those who fund the government in Georgia are really, trying to bring back Georgia to the Russian sphere of influence pretty clearly. And they are there, but they are like, you know, just concerned. They're deeply concerned. Something we experience in Ukraine for a long time. But I think what made a lot of people very clear, quite a lot of people who actually live there. Previously, we mentioned the people who, like live abroad, but a lot of diplomats, journalists, analysts, all the people who were here in 2021, 2020, in winter 2022, they lived here. They saw the country. It was their place. It actually was very comfortable, great, and kind of perfect, and very interesting, obviously. So it's them who needed to be refugees. It's them who needed to evacuate their families. It's their houses who were bombed. So I do think for a lot of people, it was such a clarity that, like, why? We don't deserve, we didn't do anything wrong. So, like they didn't get into this moral, exercise to say like, oh, what was the reason for this war? They knew perfectly clear that it's just like that. Like it's totally unprovoked. We actually didn't do anything for that, and these people don't deserve it. And this was like the great place, which is just being destroyed with no really reason beyond the imperial ambitions of the Kremlin.
Yep. Last time I really wonder how can Ukraine maintain the interest for the world that seems to be fatigued by us? Because yes, that is probably at the beginning of the full escalation of us thinking, oh, all the world will be interested in us, in our culture, in our situation. But as a result, we lost that, unfortunately. How should we talk about the death and loss which everyone is used to? That is pity, but
first of all, I disagree in the whole idea that there was this interest. We hope it would be bigger. There is still in unprecedented, incredible, huge interest to Ukraine on the third years
yep.
of the war. It's really amazing. Like it's almost impossible. I'm foreign news reporter. I thought we could be in this situation still in 2022. It's already third year, and the interest is huge. But it shouldn't be. Ukraine shouldn't be on the covers. There is no way that one place is on the covers for years. It's just unthinkable, unrealistic, naive. I think that and by the way, not to trick the Ukrainians, of course, we will be always a top priority for a lot of people, mainly because of Russia, because the world would be always fascinated by the big countries, and the world would be fascinated by China, by India, by Russia. Like we're speaking, it's not like really everybody cares about Taiwan, but people care about China. And, it's in particular why people don't care about Gaza. People care, I'm speaking about some Westerners. I'm not really speaking about global solidarity. However, no, I would say like for the Muslim world, Palestine is so incredibly symbolic for as kind of the anti-colonial fight against like a lot of things. So, but in generally, people won't care about, unfortunately, about a lot of conflicts and wars in Africa, in Latin America, and also in the Middle East. And like they've lost the interest into Syria. But this is about Russia. This is about the Western relations with Russia. So the interest will be still there. But we shouldn't, understand that there was a lot of like what I tell like a lazy journalism, which is not a bad thing. But in order to be on CNN Live, you need to be in the hotel in Lviv on the February 24th. You literally don't need to do anything. You really can be somewhere in the hotel. And that is just a challenge for journalists, for everybody. My organization is called Public Interest Journalism Lab. It was co-founded. It was founded when we was part of our team left Hromadske, in particular because we wanted to stay in the story. I've been reporting Crimea and the Donbas since 2014 and 15. And I knew very well how since 2015-16, nobody in the Ukrainian media really cared neither about Donbass nor Crimea. It was almost impossible to make the stories, applicable for the Ukrainian audience. Everything we did for many, many years was trying to find the creative ways to make Ukrainians outside of Crimea and the Donbass care about their own people. I know that today the Ukrainian, editors, our colleagues, are, also fighting with what we say the fatigue, because there is not so much audience as in the early stage of the war, watching these kind of reports from the very dangerous places. Like what should happen, like the millions of the people watching, which is huge for Ukrainian standard, that would be a few hundred thousands. So it's just a normal way. So for instance, for us, everything we do, it's a way, like it's my part of my operational work every single day is really about how to make Ukrainian story interesting. So we do very much strategic projects. So for instance, the Reckoning project on the war crime documentation, from the very first time was started as an idea that like in a month or two, big Western media would step out of Ukraine, how we can stay on the story. A different, and we'll do it by more thorough, gathering of the evidence, trying to find this creative approach that we not just telling the stories of the tragic events, but trying to prove that these are war crimes, that there is evidence. We cooperate with the lawyers, we do films, we do not just, yes, we did the articles of the, in 2022, we did the articles which were later published like in Time magazine, in New York Times, in the Atlantic, but nobody would reread the article. Who would read article from the last year? It's kind of weird. But if we did a film, we showed that films globally, we can show the films like in numerous audiences, during the screening. So I'm giving just like very one tiny example. The same was like as the, with a different project we did with the Public Interest Journalism Lab, which I call the Connecting Continents, which we were bringing the senior analysts and journalists and thinkers and editors-in-chief from Latin America, Asia, and Africa to Ukraine. Yes, it took us time to persuade like the best of the best, like a really important people to come. But in order to pitch the story for them, it should be, it was not just, of course, the interview with the President Zelensky, which they managed to have, but it was like a very thorough pitch of the story. What would be interesting for, for a Colombian editor? What would be important for South Korean, editor? So you'll do the story about, a related experience. So it's just a very, thorough thinking what will be interesting for the audience, because we're now speaking about the position, which I think it's understandable position, like a bit of like blaming somebody for, not being careful enough, like trying to shame, oh, you don't care about the very sad things which are happening. But I think we should really think from the point of view, not of blaming and shaming for not being interesting enough. I can shame and blame all the Ukrainian media for not doing enough to showing what's going on in Gaza. I can shame, but like we can find a numbers of excuses why we don't do that. The idea should come, can we really think out of like respect and to the troubles and all the other things the audiences, have in different countries? Why they should care? Why they should find this like half an hour or 10 minutes or 5 minutes to spend their time, because they're probably busy with something else, to read about that? Why they found this, argument for ourselves? And if we can answer this argument in a very human way, like saying that there is something universal about this war, there is something very human about this war, there is something also very fascinating. That would be the one thing. But the second is, I think that people are obviously very tired of, it's normal for the human nature to be tired of the, to have this empathy fatigue, because there are so much sorrow, so much troubles, and you can give up because it's just so negative, everything which is going on, if you have this mindset. But I always say that people cannot be tired of being inspired. And Ukraine is a miraculous place with so many inspiring stories of war crime survivors, of people who lived through the wars, but like are going through that, finding their new lives, of the soldiers who are fighting, of the villagers who, find the way to pursue, find the creative solutions in a very dire moment. And I think this example of Ukrainians kind of being still going through the struggle, finding their way, finding their motivation is something which would tell people, oh, our troubles are not that big. So if these people in very, hard, difficult environment are trying to do something, probably we can do that. And I think that is the message we can pass. So it's really about about the mood. But I would totally probably not advise, but I would be very cautious. I think what doesn't work, and that's also what something we do with the research in our organization, we don't need to shame people. If you shame people for not being, careful, cautious, it doesn't work. You just like the people becomes like more defensive, and they would find hundreds of excuses why they have the reason not to care, because people don't like to be ashamed, shamed, not ashamed, but shamed by somebody.
Yeah, that is a very interesting thinking of view, and you inspired me of this your thoughts. And what do you think about the Peace Summit? Was it forced organized, and how useful was such conference for us? Because of course it's crucial to declare the necessary to release Ukrainian children, return to the territories of Ukraine. But how does it affect in reality?
I'm not exactly in the school of thoughts of people who kind of measuring the results and impact in a very kind of banal way, like, oh, 3 prisoners freed, 90 prisoners freed, it worked. 25 didn't work. I do think that the Peace Summit was pretty much as a success as a fact, as a mere fact, because it's in fact a very interesting event. Yes, even if it doesn't have like a very clear results on the peace, on achieving the peace. But the fact that in one place there were people who came from various countries on the level of the head of states, ministers, and even representatives because of one country, which is not the most important country in the world, which is not a kind of a global player, and they spend their time, and every country is busy with their own crisis. If you really, we even like the most peaceful and the best, like the richest country, always would have something for their prime minister or minister to deal with. We should respect that. So the fact that they came also symbolize that, in fact, they recognize that first of all, the fact that there is some level of solidarity, they do not abandon this cause, that it actually matters for them. So, symbolically, it matters compared to the fact that usually these talks is a part of like a very tiny circle. Like, do you remember Minsk agreement? Germany, France, Ukraine. Yes, I understand it was a clear agreement, but it always looked like something like of a small group of people in a very particular, geographic location. And this is a very strange framework where Ukraine called like so many countries, which usually, in fact, nobody cares beyond the UN. So you kind of moving not UN, but like a lot of representatives to a different place. So even if like there won't be result, and maybe the issue would be if there would be the second summit, who will come? Would it be the same outcome? Would there be exactly as many people as in the first? Would people think like, oh, I came there was no sense to go there? Or people would think like, okay, I was already in the first, so probably I'll need to follow up. So, like my previous participation was not in vain. But I think that the fact that like the world showing this solidarity, it matters. It's not right away. I mean, I think like we should be very cautious because some people would say if it's a peace summit, you just like call us to support, but it doesn't mean automatically you support Ukraine. because some countries want to be neutral, some countries finding this like disposition by default like a bit odd, that you come for a peace summit with the country without like Russia as an opponent. So what is the point? But Russia today wants to show the world that the world beyond some small part of the West belongs to them. That's what they want to demonstrate. Yes, there is, US and Europe, like, or maybe like Canada, let's say the West, what they usually think. Yes, they're against us, but all the rest of the world is with us. Yeah, we'll bring the Russian propagandistic channel. We'll pay some of the local influencers, or at least we would create this kind of idea and narrative that it's all ours, and also it's the end of the old empires. So yes, people in these territories, for instance, in Africa, want French be out, don't want American imperialism, British imperialism, which means they are ours now. Maybe people in those places want French to leave. They don't want to have American presence. Can you imagine? But it doesn't mean automatically that they're welcoming Russians or Chinese. But Russia wants to say the rest of the world is ours. It's our territory, and we are there like the new empire. We are there the new, those who kind of setting in new narratives of this anti-American or anti-Western, anti-liberal fight. So in this regard, having all those people from various places was also to say that, hey, it's not yours. We cannot say it's Ukrainian. We cannot say it's Western, by the way, which is very good. But it's definitely not Russian. The world is not pro-Russian. And that's probably would be very, very important for me summary of that summit. So it's not really like, yes, we support Ukraine till the end, but the fact that, no, we're not automatically pro-Russian, that's also something to say that like we are not their pros.
But could you elaborate about the position of Mexico and Brazil, where they refused to sign the communiqué because Russia was not present? How strong the Russian influence in Latin America, in nutshell?
I think it's overestimated. So it doesn't mean that the Russia doesn't push hard. The situations are very different in Brazil and Mexico. In Mexico, you clearly see the government, the former president AMLO, who was, voted out because it was the end of his term, who was supportive of Vladimir Putin. He played kind of idea of the neutrality, but the government was, not honestly pro-Russian, but let's say more critical of Ukraine in their rhetoric. There were numbers of the cases where, for instance, last year, for the independence parade, the Mexican government invited the Russian army. There was a scandal. There is a huge Russian embassy in Mexico, over 80 diplomats. It's almost doubled since the full-scale invasion. There is a presence of Russia today, but I would say that Mexico is used as the Russian kind of place, always like for the Russian spy net. It's really aimed also on Central America, where, for instance, there are other countries like Nicaragua, which are really close Russian allies, kind of military dictatorships, or also like looking into the US. So it's one particular thing where there is a very specific Russian presence in Mexico. There is a different situation in Brazil, where there is a bit of the Cold War mentality of the President Lula, who is really genuinely thinking about like bipolar world and like the West or is unfair to us or the people in global South. It's very important for the President Lula. He's trying to balance between China and Russia. We can really insist that his neutrality isn't really, neutrality. It's like more playing into the Russian game. There is a discussion whether is he tricked to do that, because you also cannot say that Lula is like a clear authoritarian leader. It's a democracy. Lula, it was he won the elections, which actually were very risky, that the previous authoritarian-leaning Bolsonaro also wanted even to have the coup and doesn't allow Lula to be elected. But Lula is looking into China, even more than into Russia. Again, he's coming from that school of thought. But if you speak about like Brazilian media are rather pro-Ukrainian. Actually, they are not also very supportive of their government because traditionally Brazilian media, let's say, are more conservative, connected to the big business, and they would be always cautious about Lula's party. However, the party is very popular and kind of representative for Brazilian population. Yet Russia is trying to be very present in Brazil in a way of like being there as a RT, spreading their propaganda, but it's not really working well, So it's really like they are into this geopolitical Cold War type of the game, trying to deal with China, which is a very extremely important partner for them economically. Also, there is a dependency of Brazil on the Russian fertilizers, and Brazilian business is really agriculture. So there are particular things where there is a pragmatic reasons. There are a lot of effort to kind of explain to Lula, your neutrality is not neutrality. You actually are taking side. You're misleading yourself. But I don't think would be easy way for Ukraine to find to get support of Brazil, but I would really be very careful to really like also dismiss them as a potential Ukrainian partner, because in the end, Brazil, if you compare it to China, is a vibrant democracy, and I think that Ukraine should work with any democratic government, in a way that should find arguments for their position, disregarding of the legacy of those governments. It's trickier to work with the authoritarian, opportunistic leaders who do some of the things in support of Kremlin for their own, with one will to stay in power.
Yeah, but that's very interesting geopolitical game, and we always talk about only big leaders like USA, China, and India. But as a result, we need to thinking about all the world. You just mentioned about your travel into Georgia. What is your observation on whether Georgians will be able to avoid falling in Russian orbit again? Are Georgians really afraid of the war like in Ukraine, or this is narrative being artificially dispersed through them? Because I made 2 interviews with Georgian experts, and after that a lot of comments, I don't know that is bought a farm or not, about that, oh, you just wanna to be like Georgia to be like Ukraine. And I'm not sure that it was only special people from Russia who wrote that.
Not just from Russia. So yes, it's a part of the official narrative of the Georgian government. That we're trying to avoid escalation with Russia. We're so dependent on Russia. We remember the 2008, and like we don't need to provoke Russia because the risks are real. By the way, the risks are real. The risks for Georgia are real of the military intervention. But there is this very negativistic, narrative that Ukraine is almost lost the war. Like the things are so bad. And apparently, to be honest, like partially some of them, coming from the, like even like reading the Western papers, you can kind of say, oh, things are not that well. You kind of read some of the Ukrainian papers. But of course, it's largely the narrative which is shared. It's not just about Ukraine, and I think it's more complex. There is clearly a very strong Russian influence on Georgia through the, major oligarch of Georgia, Bidzina Ivanishvili, who kind of owns the government. there would be elections in October in Georgia, and these elections are literally something which is a bit deja vu for me for, for autumn of 2013. It's really about EU accession and more or less whether Georgia at this stage is gonna to go on with their path to the reforms to the European Union, or they will kind of slide to the so-called Russian sphere of interest. And it's really a lot about the economy, but it's a lot of this kind of very conservative narratives as well. So for instance, the Georgian church has a huge role on the part of the Georgian society, which trying to say, oh, this West, they are kind of this illiberal, these kind of crazy liberals who are like trying to make all our kids LGBTQ and things like that. Kind of this narrative is actually very, very important for part of the Georgian society. So it's really like this ultra-conservative, anti-liberal, narratives which are very present, which are the ones which, on top of everything, around which there is like a bit of the genuine support for the current government, like trying to say, like, oh, we're losing our sovereignty. The West is like telling us what to do, and even now, when we voted for this, as they call it, the Russian law, the law on the foreign agents, that like, oh, they put some sanctions on us. Wow, that also means that kind of their empires want to control our territory. But beyond that, it's quite clearly that there is a financial and a lot of other ways in which the Russian state is influencing, unfortunately, current Georgian politics. The biggest challenge would be for Georgia is really to, and that's where all the, where the all aspirations are, where all the plans are. It's about how to win the elections, parliamentary elections, which are very critical in October, whether the opposition can become united, whether they could be, not instead of like a number of the parties and absence of one leader, whether there could be something, but today's president, Salome Zurabishvili, kind of becoming a voice of also protest, which took a very strong moral positions against the action of the Georgian state. And it's not really like the state as such, but for instance, like the Georgian police, which used like the brutal force against the protesters and things like that. But again, I think for Ukrainians, it's so easy to understand this exactly moment in history because it's really so reminiscent for the autumn 2013.
Then I wanted to ask you about your book. You're the author of the brilliant book of reports about the occupied Crimea. I know that is a tricky question, but under what circumstances can Crimea return to Ukraine? Because as for me, Crimea is a key of our victory.
One very simple, of course, the absence of Vladimir Putin in the Kremlin. That's for me almost the guarantee. But I think that we cannot rule out the military option in particular. First of all, I think the last years has proven that Crimea is not the red line for the Kremlin. Ukraine is successfully moving the Russian Black Sea with the using of the sea drones from the Black Sea little by little. Ukrainian army is targeting military targets inside of Crimea for the last 2 years. So nothing very special happened after that. I remember very well how, in a very unfortunate manner, some of the Western media were calling me for the command right after the first very big attacks in Kiev on October 10th, 2022, when Kiev was, hit with the first missiles after the, full-scale invasion. And they were all speaking in the tone like, is it the retaliation for Ukraine, firing the Kerch Bridge? And like, first of all, it doesn't matter why, that attack was planned and coordinated. Today, we have, as of today, 4 arrest warrants for 4 top military leaders of the Russian army, including Shoigu, Gerasimov, and also the head of the Black Sea Fleet, in particular for the attack on the civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, starting on the October 10th. So by the by the decision of the ICC, International Criminal Court, that attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure may constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. So it's not about retaliation, it's not really about the Crimean bridge. They did something to destroy Ukrainian power grid and was a part of the story. So we need to keep these things separately. But it's true that for me, as somebody who was covering the conflict, the annexation of Crimea since the very first day and went ongoing there, I was always focused on human rights part of the story, repressions, attacks on the indigenous populations, Crimean Tatars, abductions, like all the hardships which Crimeans, people who live in Crimea had through after the annexation. What I missed in that story, and I think what we all missed, that it was always a part of the security plan for Russia. Russia didn't look in Crimea in terms of the human rights abuses and just shutting down the dissent. It's happening, like the dictators shut down the dissent. They don't want the people, speaking against them. They don't want people like support Ukraine in there. But if we speak about the arrest of Nariman Jilal, one of the leaders of the Majlis and the top figure who remained in Crimea, and his arrest half a year before the full-scale invasion, it was clear that what Russia was doing, it's like cleaning up the space. At the moment of the full-scale invasion, there was literally nobody in Crimean civil society, among the Crimean journalists, among the Crimean civil society leaders, who would be there observing the situation, telling, hey, there are Russian troops in here, there are Russian missiles here, they're preparing something, they're cooking something, and who would be capable to tell that like it shouldn't happen, bring people on the streets or wherever. The same things about the Crimean, the carriage bridge. Is it really for bringing people to Kuban? Is it really like, or bringing people from Kuban to Crimea? Is it really like they're so interested in this like traveling? Yes, partially. Maybe there is some economic incentive because there is a blockade and you need to deliver goods from Russia to Crimea. But you now understand what is the major reason for the bridge to be to let Russian tanks go through, Russian military equipment. So in the end, the country would be they would be capable always to attack Ukraine. Without the occupation of Crimea, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine is impossible. Without occupation of Crimea, control of the Black Sea is impossible, which means also controlling and destroying Ukrainian economy, and being able to keep the Ukrainian south. So in a way, inevitably, Ukraine understood that. And Ukraine needs to find the way that the Crimea is not in the Russian hands, because as long as it's in Russian hands, there is a permanent threat of a full-scale invasion in there.